If we focus on action, the source of human action is human body, and human body is the animal side of humans. And our actions are built on desires. In a sense, our body is the collection of desires, and through desires, the body has certain needs, but beyond needs, body has desires. And those desires, needs and desires both, but since desire cover needs as well, that's why I'll just focus on desire. Desire spur or instigate action. So you feel the desire for food and then you grab food. Okay, so that's one. But the human element, so the body, desires, actions. And obviously, the basis of it is needs. So you need to fulfill those needs, otherwise your body won't be able to sustain itself or survive. But desires are on top of the needs, and they are the basis of human creativity, human, dynamism, and all those. So they're great. Desires are great ones of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. So desires is urge for transcendence in the sense that an urge for fulfillment beyond, the fulfillment of the basic need. So that's the transcendence of your basic needs. And these desires instigate different types of actions. And whenever these desires instigate action, we can use part of our reason to find the best way to satisfy those desires. So that can be one function of reason. And reason is this non-animal part, or part of reason is non-animal part. And this non-animal part really comes to forth when reason sometimes tells us. So there's a desire, there's instigation, and that could possibly lead to action, but before it does, reason stops it, put hold to it, and say whether, should I do this or not? So this putting limit to, temporary or permanent limit to certain desire, this is specifically a uniquely human thing, and it's basis of all morality. So that's why if there's an ideology which, in principle, says that all desires should be fulfilled, and that's our human right, then that ideology basically denies morality, because the very conception of morality is based on this ability to put a stop to certain desires for certain reasons. Those reasons can be correct, those reasons can be incorrect. But this power, which has ability to question our desires, and in consequence, the ability to put hold on certain desires, stop certain desires, delay certain desires, is a uniquely human ability and power. And Imam Ghazali said that this is the fourth type of reason. So this is the fourth type of reason. Fourth type of reason is the reason, conception of reason as a power. So our basic, so reason is a power, basic power, but that basic power, when it matures through education, through training, and the heart of that is a family, and then your mother, and all those things, you develop this power into a practical reason which is able to distinguish between, and by practical I mean here practical is anything which is related to freedom. Develops into practical reason which has ability to differentiate between, ability to question desires, put some desires on hold, permanent or temporary, and eventually evaluate desires and let some desires fulfill, some desire keep unfulfilled, either permanently or temporarily, due to a variety of reasons. Those reasons can be moral as well as disciplinary, those reasons can be practical, etc. But this is the power, and it is a specifically human power. Call it the fourth type of reason. We can call it practical reason. It's different from the third type of practical reason we did. That is more to do with experience rather than. So this is practical reason more in a Kantian sense, and the third one was practical reason more in an Aristotelian sense. Okay, and as we'll see, this power is based on the ability to differentiate between two types of consequences. Differentiate between two types of consequences. Immediate and long term. So one of the reasons you might want to stop some desires or put some desires on hold, because you can see that although immediate consequences are satisfaction and pleasure and all that, long-term consequences are misery, pain, and all that. So long-term misery and pain outweigh immediate satisfaction and pleasure. That's why you don't act on the instigation of certain desires. But this taming of desires, or putting them on hold, or just delaying certain desires, or reducing certain desires, or not fulfilling certain desires at all, this crucially depends on this fundamental difference in differentiation between short-term and long-term consequences. And a rational person is a person in this sense, is a person who can see beyond short-term consequences and see the long-term consequences. And that's what Imam Ghazali calls awaqibul umur. Can see the long-term consequences of a thing and go beyond the short-term consequences, which are pleasure, or maybe pleasure and satisfaction, and see that long-term this thing is bad for me, this thing is bad for my body, or this thing is bad for my soul, or this thing is bad in itself. That's why I'm going to put stop to this, or ignore this, or transcend this immediate pleasure and satisfaction, and look for something which is lasting. And that eventually depends on the whole difference between ad-dunya and al-akhirah, because the fundamental Islamic morality is based on this distinction between dunya, this world, and the hereafter. But if you look at the etymology of these things, dunya means anything which is nearer to you, and akhirah means anything which is farther from you. So you can't really have this distinction between short-term and long-term unless you have actually a metaphysical distinction between dunya and akhirah. And that's why, unless you have this metaphysical conception of hereafter, all these distinctions between short-term and long-term are basically illusions, in the sense that, as Keynes has supposed to have said this, that in the long term we are all dead. So unless you have a concept of akhirah, all the distinction, all the effort to distinguish between short-term and long-term fundamentally are going to collapse. And we see this, for example, in the world of like utilitarian philosophers make this distinction between short-term utility and long-term utility. And in capitalism you have this distinction between short-term profits and long-term profits. But if you study the evolution of modern capitalism, you will see that this distinction has collapsed. Why has this collapsed? Because unless you have this distinction is anchored in the metaphysical distinction between dunya and akhirah, these conceptions are not going to hold, because every capitalist is a human being, and they know that they are going to be dead long-term, so they are always going to prefer short-term profits over long-term profit. And that's one of the basic crises of, one of the fundamental crises of capitalism at the moment. But anyway, I digress. So this is the fourth conception of reason which Imam Ghazali is going to talk about, and I basically explained it. Now we are going to go back to the text and see if there is anything we have.